In connection to Chof Cheshvon, the Yom Haledes, the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Nishmas Eden, the Friedrich Rebbe related a story about the Baal Yom Haledes, about the Rebbe Rashab, that happened when he was a child of 4 or 5 years old in Shabbos Parshas Vayero. The Rebbe Nishmas Eden, the Rebbe Rashab, went into his grandfather, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, to receive a bracha in connection to his birthday. And he started crying. He said, why is it that Hashem appeared to Avraham Avinu, and to us, or to him, Hashem does not appear? So the Tzemach Tzedek responded that when a Yid Tzaddik, at the age of 99 years old, decides that he needs to have a bris milah, so he is deserving that Hashem should appear to him. The Rebbe says that we discussed already a number of times regarding the various different lessons in Avodas Hashem that we could take out of this story. Just like all stories of Rabbi Seinu Nesienu, of our Rabbeim, which had reached us, especially the stories that the Rabbeim themselves publicized. So they certainly have heroes to each and every one of us. Says the Rebbe, so here we're going to focus on another aspect of this particular story. The Friedrich Rebbe, when telling the story, was medayik. He was in particular to mention that the Baal Yom Haledes, that the Rebbe Rashab, at the time was a child of 4 or 5 years old. Now, since the words of a Nasi B'Yisrael, the words of a Rebbe, especially something that he says publicly, and he says to print it, so the words of the Friedrich Rebbe, that he said that if Rebbe Rashab was 4 or 5 years old, surely these words are very accurate and precise, so we need to say that also this aspect, this detail of the story, is not only to bring out the greatness of the Rebbe Rashab, that even at such a young age, he's being bothered why Hashem does not appear to him, and that it touches him so deeply to the extent that he bursts out crying, but rather that this itself is also a hero in Avodas Hashem to each and every one of us. From this we understand that even though the story contains many heroes for every single Yid, but there's a main hero over here for those that are of the age of 4 or 5 years old. And we don't only mean, says the Rebbe, someone that's an adult in years, and just spiritually he's like a little child of 4 or 5. 4 or 5 is someone that didn't come yet to the shleimus, to the complete level of chinuch, of full chinuch. That means we might be speaking about a person, an adult, that does not have das, does not have understanding and knowledge to such an extent, not only that he doesn't understand himself, but he's not even ready for full chinuch, that means even to be influenced by somebody else, and that even such a person could demand, and with an inner strength, similar to crying. What does crying show? That something touches you so strong in a way that's higher than your own limitations. So even such a person could also be touched to such an extent by the fact that Hashem didn't appear to him, similar to the way Hashem appears to Avraham Avinu. And why should this be able to be applied to every single Yid? Because Avraham Avinu is one of the 3 avos of each and every Yid of all generations. And this is why that every single Yid, all of the children, have b'Yerusha, have as an inheritance those in Yonim that existed by the avos. Says the Rebbe, but it's not only true regarding an adult that's not higia lechinuch, that didn't reach the stage of chinuch, but actually it's mainly to a child in the literal sense of a 4 or 5 year old child, in the simple sense that even he could be educated in this kind of way, that he should be demanding with a toika, with strength, to the extent that he's crying of why it is that Hashem is not appearing to him like Hashem appeared to Avraham Avinu. Now, says the Rebbe is preempting a question. One may ask, how could there be even any sort of comparison and similarity between the Rebbe Rashab and every single Yiddish child? The Rebbe Rashab, being a Kadosh Mibet and holy from his mother's stomach, he's a Nasi ben Nasi, he's a Rebbe, the son of a Rebbe. In his very youngest age, it was already noticeable the greatness that's going to be coming later. Based on a famous Gemara that Rebbe quotes, Butzin, Mikatve Yedir, which is a moshel saying that you could tell already, referring to pumpkins, that you could tell from their earliest stage of how they are going to be when they mature. And the Gemara applies this also to Talmidei Chachamim, Tabaya and Rava, etc. So the same thing that Rebbe is saying, that for Rebbe Rashab, you could tell already from the youngest age what he's going to be like later. Obviously, the Rebbe Rashab at that point is more bardas, is on a higher intellectual level than other people, even, not only other children, but even adults. So how could you might ask, how could you learn a lesson regarding the chinuch of every single Yiddish child when clearly chinuch is something that really depends on each child according to his own level, according to his own knowledge and sharpness, etc. Now, even though, says the Rebbe, it's also clear, as we just mentioned, that definitely the point of the story is shayach, not only to a Rebbe, a Nasi b'Yisrael, but that it has a lesson for everybody else, because as mentioned earlier, the actual fact that the story was told in public and it was printed, that itself was a proof that it's not one of those things of a Rebbe or of a Nasi, which as the Pasuk uses the term b'shichmoi v'maylo gavoya mikolam, there's certain things of a Nasi that is just completely beyond everybody else. But from the fact that the story is told to us means that it is from those things that have a connection to every single Yid. But still concluding the question that the Rebbe is preempting, wouldn't it be enough to say that it's a hayrah for all Yidden, but at least for adults? It's a hayrah for adults. Maybe even for those people that, as we said before, that Beruchnias didn't come to the full level of chinuch. But why do we have to say that it's shayach even to a katan, to a little child, kipshuta in the simple sense, in years, to literally a 4 or 5 year old child? Says the Rebbe, so we're going to understand this by first looking at various different shiurim that we find regarding the inyan of chinuch, regarding education. And that is, that even though it's true what we said before, that chinuch applies to each child according to his own level, his own sharpness, his own knowledge, etc., yet there are certain aspects of chinuch that we do connect to a very particular age, to a specific age. And the Rebbe says, for example, there's a general halacha, there's a general din, the Rebbe is quoting from the Gemara over here, where one Hamoyda tells another, Batsir mi bar shis, that a child younger than 6 do not accept. And once he's 6 years old, you should accept him, and you should fill him, you should stuff him with Torah like an ox, like stuffing an ox. In other words, that the learning of a child in this sort of style of stuffing him, giving him so much, which will obviously bring to a much higher level in the shleimus of chinuch generally, starts at the age of 6. And even over here, of course, we say it's always going to depend on the health of the child, the strength of the child, etc. And if a child is weaker, we say wait till he's 7. But nevertheless, we also say, the same Gemara says, less than 6, don't accept him. That means even if he's a strong, and a healthy child, and even if he's a healthy child, healthier and stronger and smarter than others that are even 7 years old. So there's clearly a distinction between children that are less than 6 years old and 6 years old. That means this idea that once he's 6 years old, stuff him, fill him with Torah like an ox, which is a shleimus hachinuch, is not really dependent on the knowledge, on the ability, on the strength of the child. The Rebbe says this is similar to the concept that we know regarding bar mitzvah. There's a certain shear that the Torah says that when Yud Gimel of mitzvahs, when he's 13 years old, he's obligated in mitzvahs. So even if he should be a child and a very clever and smart child, and maybe he's even smarter than someone that's much older, nevertheless, he's going to be potter, he's going to be exempt from mitzvahs minat Torah, he cannot count for a minyan, and so on and so forth. How do we understand this? What's this idea that certain shiurim are not really dependent on how smart a child is, but this is just the way that shiur that the Torah gave? So the Rebbe says this is really connected with the whole chidush of matan Torah compared to the avodah of Torah and mitzvahs to the way it was before matan Torah. So we know that the mitzvahs and avodah before matan Torah, what the avos were able to do was only able to reach what Chassidus refers to as shoyrish hanevroim, only to the root, to the source of where this particular neshama came from. And this is why what really mattered was only the person's own shleimus, how perfect he's doing his own avodah and serving Hashem. Because based on his own avodah, that's what he's going to be drawing down from the person's own source. But it really didn't even matter so much the particular means of how he did the avodah. In other words, with which gashmi is the object he did the avodah and the mitzvah. Because what mainly mattered was the person's own neshama and to which levels he could reach, which heights he could reach. The Rebbe says this is why we find that Yaakov Avinu, He's able to achieve what we draw down through tefillin. He's able to achieve it through the maklois, the whole story that the Torah describes with the various different sticks that Yaakov was taking and setting up, etc., as the Zohar explains. So this is all before Matan Torah. However, the avodah of Torah mitzvahs after Matan Torah, this draws down not only from the shoyrish, from the source of the person's own level, but you're drawing down from Hashem himself that's completely higher than the source of the Nivroim, than the source of the creations. And this Hamshacha, this is something that really a person down here can never achieve on his own. It's only because this is the way the Eibishter set it up, that when you do a particular mitzvah, you're going to be drawing down a particular Hamshacha, something, a particular level of godliness from Hashem down here into this world. And this is also why it's going to be achieved only if you do it exactly according to the specifications, the measurements that were given from Hashem by Matan Torah. In fact, says the Rebbe, even nowadays, if you should have a tzaddik like Yaakov Avinu, he would also be able to do the same sort of thing of achieving through the sticks, like what Yaakov was achieving. But again, he's only going to draw down, he's only going to reach according to his own shoyresh, according to the great level of the avoid of that particular tzaddik. But you don't have this idea of the hamshacha of Hashem himself, which is completely beyond what we could reach on our own, which this only comes with the avoid of after Matan Torah. Says the Rebbe, just like it is regarding mitzvahs generally, that every mitzvah has its own limitations, its own way of doing it, and this is the only way you could draw down from Hashem is only if you do it exactly as it's prescribed by the Torah. Says the Rebbe in a similar way is regarding the time of the obligation. That the fact that we say that you can have a child, that it's a very young child, and he may be much smarter than someone that's much older, but that's still only what's called his own shleimus, his own personal level of achievement or perfection of the nivra, of the creation. However, those aspects that come mitzad matan Torah, mitzad what Hashem is giving, what Hashem is being drawn down, then this has to be exactly according to the way it's prescribed from above with the exact limitations. So for example, the idea that it could only start when the child is 13 years old. And back to what we're talking about over here, so too in chinuch, there's a certain shleimus of chinuch, which we call this idea of stuffing him like an ox, that starts at the age of 6. So again, regardless of how smart or simple the child is, every child has this shear that the Torah gave of a 6-year-old boy. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand and apply it back to our case. Since what the Frierdiker Rebbe was telling us was that the Rebbe Rashab at the time was younger than 6 years old, he was 4 or 5 years old. So despite the fact that he's very great in his das and his knowledges and understanding, even at that age, nevertheless, in regards to those aspects of Matan Torah, again, these inyanim that are drawn down from above, the way it's set up mitzat Torah, he is still on that level of younger than a 6-year-old boy, and therefore he didn't reach this level that Torah calls the shleimus of chinuch. Says the Rebbe, so since by telling this story, when the Frierdiker Rebbe told the story, when he publicized the story, which shows that it's clearly not something only for the Nesiya Yisrael, only for the Rabbeim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was particular to say this detail, that the Rebbe Rashab at the time was a child of 4 or 5 years old. That tells us that this is shayach to every single Yiddish child that's younger than 6 years old, since according to those limitations of what Torah says, according to the measurements that Torah says, this child of less than 6 years old is in that same category of chinuch as what the Rebbe Rashab was. Says the Rebbe, so now, based on this that we say now, that by publicizing the story, the Frierdiker Rebbe was trying to tell us a hira in a way the chinuch is supposed to go, even with a little child in the literal sense. We can now understand how this story contains not just a hira, some lesson in avodas Hashem, even for little children, but that there's a major essential chiddush and total novel idea over here in regards to the whole idea of chinuch. And that is, it's known what the Rambam elaborates regarding the way we learn with a child. We have to encourage the child with those things that are suitable, that are loved by the child according to his age, according to his maturity. So the example is that the Rebbe brings from the Rambam over here. We tell the child, you read these psukim and I'll give you nuts and other sweet things, etc. Because according to his young age and the level of his mind, which is not so developed yet, he doesn't understand yet the real quality of all the proper and good things. Says the Rebbe, and yet what's our story telling us? That here what's being demanded of a child is that it should touch him so deeply. What should bother him? Not physical good or things or similar ideas, but rather what should bother a child is, why is Hashem not appearing to him? That means we need to educate a child that godliness should become so much part of his life. This should be the things that are loved by him, that this should bother him and should concern him so much, that it should concern him so much that Hashem doesn't appear to him similar to the way he appeared to Avraham Avinu. Says the Rebbe, if we wouldn't have this story with the Rebbe Rashab, says the Rebbe, we don't know whether in fact we would be able to be poyel, we would be able to achieve this type of feeling by every Yiddish child. Because since by nature, as we quoted from the Rambam, a child is drawn to Gashmi things, so we need to educate a child with those things that are beloved to him, that he likes. But once we have this story, especially after the Frierdiker Rebbe told the story publicly and said to print it, says the Rebbe, it's an absolute clear thing, it's a certainty, that with this was revealed, and furthermore, it was like a new channel was opened up, a new way was opened up in Chinuch, that now through proper Chinuch, we could break these limitations of nature that we said before, of a Yiddish child, the way it seemed to be, that it's only to do with Gashmi things, but rather we could accustom them to really want and desire Ruchnius, to bring out such a tremendous yearning for Hashem to reveal himself to them. And this should be their whole concern. Says the Rebbe, and if we see a Yiddish child, that it really doesn't bother him, he's not concerned about the fact that Hashem doesn't appear to him, it's not because this child is not shaykh to this, but it's because the mechanech, because the educator was not speaking to the child with dvarim hayotzim and alev, with words coming from his heart. Up until this point of the Sicha, the Rebbe is focusing on the cry of the Rebbe Rashab. Now the Rebbe turns to the answer of the Tzemach Tzedek. Says the Rebbe, just like there's a Vayero from the question and the crying of the Rebbe Rashab, a lesson for every Yiddish child, as discussed now at length, so too it's also understood that the response, the answer of the Tzemach Tzedek to the Rebbe Rashab, that a Yid tzaddik at 99 years old, he decides to have a bris milah. He's deserving that Hashem should appear to him. So this is an answer, and therefore also shaykh to the education of every single Yiddish child. What is the Tzemach Tzedek saying? The Tzemach Tzedek is not saying that Hashem appears only to Avraham Avinu, because he decided to have a bris at 99 years old, but to anybody else, especially in this case, someone like the Rebbe Rashab, this has absolutely no shaykhs to. If that's what the Tzemach Tzedek was saying, is that Tzemach Tzedek should have just said simply that you cannot compare to Avraham Avinu. So rather, the Tzemach Tzedek is giving a message over here, how every single person could come to Vayero Elav Hashem. There's a Vayero, every person could merit somewhat of this revelation of godliness. That when a person has a hachlot, when a person decides that no matter what spiritual level they're at, even if they're like a tzaddik of the age of 99 years old, but if we have that decision that we need to be mal ourselves, that means to say that we need to still work hard on removing, on uncovering any blockages, any concealments of the world that conceal ungodliness. And we work on removing that. This type of feeling, says the Rebbe, this is shaykh to every single yid, every single person. Because even though we say that Avraham Avinu, he was a tzaddik at 99 years old, and that he was, as described, Yoim and Shleim, his days were perfect in avodah to Hashem. And therefore, when he decides to be mal himself, that means to ensure that he's not disturbed by the concealment of the world. So obviously it's going to be much greater chiddush by him than the achlot of someone that's not a tzaddik. But the Rebbe says, we know there's a concept of opening the channel. That means once someone worked on a particular Indian and brought it into the world, then this opens the channel for everybody else. So if Avraham Avinu did this opens the channel that everyone could achieve this sort of attitude and this sort of idea with much less effort. And especially, says the Rebbe, now that we're after Matan Torah, so we could, through a much smaller and a much easier avodah, accomplish that which the avos achieved through their hard avodah and yegiyah. And therefore, this too is shaykh to every single yid. And therefore, says the Rebbe, this is the hirad of the Tzemach Tzedek's answer in the area of chinuch, even to ktanim, even to little children. That is, that after we bring out this strong yearning and desire of a child, that Hashem should appear to him, we now need to explain to the child that the way to achieve this is through the decision that you always have to circumcise yourself. That means you always have to be removing the concealment of the world, removing those blockages. That means we need to educate a child not to be nispoil, not to be impacted of the concealments of the world, of the blockages of the world. They shouldn't be, in other words, they shouldn't care about what the world says, rather what the Torah wants. And this achlata needs to be so strong as a child that gam kiyaskin, that even when he grows old, he won't move away from it. That means it needs to be so deeply rooted inside of him that he'll always remember, even when he's a much higher stage, and a much greater stage in Avodas Hashem, there always needs to be this attitude that he needs to circumcise himself. And then that brings it, even at his young age, he should have the Vayero Elav Hashem. That means he should have a level of godliness that's illuminating himself and his environment in a way as V'hoya Hashem l'chol ha'olam, that Hashem is his light all of the time. Says the Rebbe, just like our Rabbeim opened a new channel in the Inyan of Chinuch in regards to Bein Adam Lamakim, between man and Hashem, that is, as discussed, that we can educate Yiddish children now to desire in Yanim of Yiddishkeit, not just because of reward, but rather in a way that these things should become their life, part of their life, that it bothers them to the extent of crying why Hashem doesn't appear to them as he appeared to Avraham Avinu. Says the Rebbe, we also find this nekuda in an area of in Yanim Shebin Adam Lachaveri, between man and his fellow. And here too is a story of the Rebbe Rashab of the Baal Yemei Ledes, again when he was a little boy. When the Rebbe Rashab was 4 years old, the tailor one time brought a particular garment that he had sewn for the Rebbe Rashab's mother, and when she was trying on, or when they were looking at the particular garment, the tailor was there as when they were measuring to see if the garment was right. The Rebbe Rashab innocently pulled out a little piece of cloth from the tailor's pocket. In other words, it was a little bit of cloth from this original material that should have gone to the Rebbetzin, and it was in his pocket. So the tailor was very, very embarrassed and started excusing himself. He forgot about this piece of material that remained, etc. After the tailor left, so the Rebbetzin, the mother of the Rebbe Rashab, sort of told him off that because of him, the tailor was embarrassed. And when the Rebbe Rashab heard this, so he started crying bitterly. A few weeks later, the Rebbe Rashab, again a little boy, goes into his father, the Rebbe Maharash, and he asks, how could one correct the Aveira, how does one do tshuva, how does one correct the Aveira of embarrassing someone? So his father asks him, why do you want to know? And so he said he just wants to know. He didn't want to give the details of what actually happened. Later on, the Rebbe Rashab's mother asked him, why didn't you want to tell your father the whole story? So he responds, isn't it enough that I messed up once in embarrassing someone? Should I now be over? Should I now transgress rechilus, gossip, and lashon hara? Says the Rebbe, at first glance, when you look at the story, there doesn't seem to be such a terrible inyan of halbonas ponim, of embarrassing someone. Because, first of all, as the diuk in the Sipur was, the particular detail in the story was, the Rebbe Rashab did this completely innocently, completely unintentionally. It was completely b'shayim. He didn't mean to do anything. Furthermore, it wasn't barabim, it wasn't in public. Only his mother, the Rebbetzin, was there. And nevertheless, as soon as he hears that the tailor was embarrassed, it bothers him so much that he starts crying bitterly. What does this show? He was bothered not so much that he was the one that caused the tailor to be embarrassed, and he deserves a punishment or something like that, but even more what's bothering him is he's really touched and bothered the actual fact that here is the tailor was embarrassed. And this is also why he didn't want to tell his father about this. Even though the fact that he doesn't respond to his father, that itself could have been an issue of kibud av, and yet he doesn't want to tell his father about it. Why? Because he doesn't want the tailor to be embarrassed. And furthermore, the Rebbe says, telling his father would have only been for correcting the Aveira. But he couldn't stand the actual fact to speak bad about another Yid in any way whatsoever. Says the Rebbe again, since the story was being told to us, together with the emphasis that the Rebbe Rashab was a 4-year-old boy at the time, this is again a proof to this idea that we could educate every single child also in this way. Says the Rebbe, from all of this we have the lesson to what extent the obligation we have every single year to be mishtadl, to put in so much effort in the union of chinuch, of education, both in regards to our own children, as the pisgam of the Baal Yom Huledes of the Rebbe Rashab, famous pisgam, that just like putting on tefillin every single day is a mitzvah d'oraisa on every single yid, regardless if he's a gadol b'Torah or a simple person. So too there's an absolute obligation on every single year to think every single day a half hour about the chinuch of children, and to do everything within our power, and even more than that, to make sure that the children are going in the path that we're educating them. But the same thing is true, and says the Rebbe, the same thing is true regarding other Yiddish children, whose parents, for whatever reason, didn't give them a proper chinuch. Because then the obligation is on every single chacham v'chacham in Yisrael to ensure that these children get a proper chinuch. Says the Rebbe, and through setting up these tzivos Hashem, which will go out of Galus, with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, through Mashiach Tzidkeinu, B'karev Mamash.